Ladies and gentlemen, lads and lasses, today I bring you the story of King Thrushbeard. Once upon a time, somewhere in Germany during the Middle Ages, there was a king who had an exceptionally beautiful daughter who was also exceptionally unpleasant. She was proud and arrogant and spiteful and just the sort of person that nobody wanted to be around or get to know just because she was she grated on you. And so one day the king decided, I am sick and tired of my atrocious daughter, I'm going to slough her off onto somebody else. And so he sent messengers throughout all the different kingdoms of the land and invited all of his noble friends, saying, come to this feast that I am throwing. And he's thinking to himself, there's got to be one guy in the whole world who is able to woo my daughter's heart. The day of the feast arrived, and all of these great and lordly people start showing up. Kings and barons and counts and aristocracy, all of these marvelous people. And they're all gathered together in the great hall, and the king brings out the princess and starts introducing her to everybody one by one. And she finds something wrong with everybody. He's too fat, he's too thin, he's too tall, he's too short, he's too pale, he's too red-faced. One after another, all of these guys are denied. Then the princess starts talking to a young prince, and they actually seem to sort of get along kind of well. They dance, they talk, they haunt the dessert table, and the king is thinking to himself, this is good. But then the princess starts going around to all the other guests at the feast and starts talking to them about King Thrushbeard. You see, the prince, even though he seemed like a really great guy, had just one problem, and that was that his beard grew a little crooked. So the princess went around mocking him, calling him Thrushbeard. Birdface. She called him Birdface. That is some cold, cold stuff, princess. Understandably hurt by this, King Thrushbeard quietly disappeared from the party. The king wasn't so pleased by this turn of events either. That was the final straw. He took his daughter aside and said, you know what, young lady? You are getting married to the first beggar who comes in the door tomorrow. And that's final. The next morning, a poor young minstrel like yours truly showed up at the castle, and the king brought him in, and he played his lute for the king and his daughter, and pleased the king very much. Sure way to curry favor with the king in the Middle Ages. Have mad skills on the lute. The king says, young man, you are a gentleman and a scholar. How would you like to marry my daughter? The princess hears this and says, what? The minstrel says, your highness, you do me a great honor, but your daughter doesn't look like she's ever done a hard day's work in her life, and I'm very poor. She would have to work very hard in order to survive if she married me. To which the princess said, oh no. To which her father said, somebody call the priest! And the minstrel and the princess were married that very hour. To add insult to injury, after the ceremony was over, the king said to his daughter, you're poor now. You can't live in the castle anymore. Goodbye. Boom! Slams the door on her face. Shocked and horrified by this sudden turn of events, the princess thought that things couldn't possibly get any worse. The minstrel pulled her up on the back of his horse, and the two happy newlyweds go trotting off straight out of the country. As they went clopping along, they went through forests and meadows and fields, just beautiful countryside, and the princess asked her new husband, whose kingdom is this? To which the minstrel replied, this is the country of King Thrushbeard. And the princess says, oh, great, could have married a king and had all this beautiful country to live in, and I end up with you poor minstrel person. To which the young man replied, I'm not sure how I feel about you talking about other guys like this. Finally, they pull up their horse next to a hut outside of the town, and the minstrel says, honey, we're home. The place is a dump. The princess is appalled. She asks him, where are the servants? The minstrel says, really? Servants? I'm poor. I live in a hut. Anything that you want done, you've got to do yourself. Now go start a fire and I'll bring in dinner. A few minutes later, the minstrel comes back inside and sees his wife kneeling on the floor in front of the fireplace, just bawling her eyes out. Says, Shutzi, what's wrong? She says, I don't even know how to start a fire. And so her husband helped her start a fire, and together they cooked dinner, ate, and then went to bed. But the princess, still bitter about the entire situation, decided to sleep on the couch. Over the next few days, the princess tried various kinds of work around the house. Basket weaving, spinning thread, scrubbing the floor, but she had soft royalty hands, and everything gave her blisters and made her fingers bleed. Finally, her husband said, okay, let's try this. Being a minstrel is my passion, but I have to support myself somehow, so for my day job, I make pottery. So why don't we try doing this together? It's market day tomorrow in the town. Why don't you take all of the pottery that I've made to the town square and you'll sell it? So the next day she does just that, and it turns out she's actually pretty good at hawking stuff. That is, until a drunken soldier drives his horse straight into her booth and smashes all the pottery she's supposed to sell. Now she is panicking. What am I going to tell my husband? He's going to be pissed. We're not going to be able to pay the bills. We're not going to be able to eat. She gathers up all the broken everything and goes back home and explains what happened to her husband. He comforts her and he says, it's okay. We'll find a way to manage. So the next day he sits her down. He says, okay, we lost a big investment with that pottery. The only way that we're going to be able to stay afloat is if you get a job. Luckily, Schutz, I've found one for you. The cooks at the king's castle on the other side of town need a kitchen maid. The princess says, all right, let's do this. So the next day she goes to the castle and the cooks put her to work, and it is grueling work. It is broiling in that kitchen. Of course, in the back of her mind this whole time, she's thinking about the fact that she is working in the castle of King Thrushbeard. Now, at first, she's really bitter about the irony of the whole situation, that now she used to be a princess, but now she's a kitchen maid in the castle of the man that she turned down. She's dealing with all of this regret, and as days go by, bit by bit, she's able to put her pride aside because she realizes that her husband is depending on her. The cooks are kind to her, they give her food to take home after every shift. Eventually, she even becomes so compassionate that she starts leaving scraps of food for the mice in the kitchen because she realizes that they're hungry too. And then, just as she's really beginning to own her life and everything seems to be going so smoothly, she finds out that King Thrushbeard is getting married. And of course, being a kitchen maid, she has to help prepare the wedding feast. All of a sudden, in the middle of the wedding celebration, King Thrushbeard bursts into the kitchen, walks up to her, grabs her by the hand, and says, you must dance with me. She is terrified. What in the world is going on here? Suddenly she starts to panic. She's not a princess anymore. She's just in rags. She can't go out there with all those noble people. Some of them might recognize her. While she's in this daze, King Thrushbeard leads her out into the great hall, and they start dancing. While they're dancing, the jars of food that she's been keeping in her pockets of what she's going to take home fall out and break. All of a sudden, she's covered in soup and meat, and all of the nobility turn and see this, and they start laughing their heads off. And all that she can think to herself is, I wish I was 1,000 feet underground. And she turns and runs out of the great hall, trips over the threshold, falls on her face, bursts into tears. Suddenly she feels a hand on her arm. She looks up. It's her husband. But he's not in rags anymore. He's decked out in the nicest threads she's ever seen. And he's holding a false beard in his hand. He smiles at her and says, sweetheart, why are you crying on your wedding day? Shock and awe. The young prince had fallen in love with her, despite the mockery that she had made of him, and had secretly married her through her father's vow. And it also happened that he was the drunken soldier who had crashed into her pottery on purpose. Everything that he had put her through, he had done to cure her of her pride and teach her compassion. The princess starts crying again and apologizing for how cruel she was to him and saying that she doesn't deserve him. The king dismisses all of that, forgives her outright, because he has seen the change that she has gone through ever since they got married. And so the king and the princess renew their vows, with her father there, by the way. Apparently he was in on this the whole time. And to cap it all off, at the end of the ceremony, the princess asks her husband to grow his beard back for real once again. And from that day forward, the king was always known as King Thrushbeard, and the two lived happily ever after. The end. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed the story of King Thrushbeard. I love this fairy tale in particular because it shares a lot of interesting similarities with one of Shakespeare's plays, The Taming of the Shrew. Which leads me to some exciting news. I'm actually going to get to be in a production of The Taming of the Shrew this February. I am an actor and a theater major, and the theater department at my school is currently working on a really awesome project called Shakespeare in Rep. For this project, we're going to be performing 3 different Shakespeare plays: The Taming of the Shrew, Love's Labour's Lost, and Two Gentlemen of Verona. I will include all the information for that in the description below. The really cool thing about this project is that we are trying to mimic as closely as possible the original acting conditions in which Shakespeare's plays would have been performed. I would love to have as many people come and see this as possible. It's going to be an incredible theater experience, both for us as the actors and for you guys, the audience. Also, of course, if you enjoyed the story of King Thrushbeard, go ahead and click that like button below, and also subscribe to This Spoken World for more stories, and go ahead and share this video with 10 of your closest friends, or if you didn't enjoy it, 10 of your closest enemies. Thank you all so much once again, and I will see you all next time.